Welcome to the Climate Report. This is Hart Hagen, and I'm here with Randall Daniel. Randall's head of the Kentucky Libertarian Party. Randall, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Even better since our last conversation. The 30 minutes of just talking between them even further lifted my spirits.
Oh, I'm
I'm
happy.
here.
I don't always have that effect on people, so whenever I can, I'm happy about that. So we had one conversation about the Kentucky Libertarian Party, and then we talked about regenerative farming. You own a few acres in Bullitt County. Your family owns several hundred acres, and my heart's desire is to help people farm regeneratively and profitably. But that's another conversation. What we decided to do is to talk about Hart's climate philosophy. And I have 6 points here, and it's like, okay, so a little bit of background. I like 5 or 6 years ago, I got interested in native plants, and it's like, oh, and here's how ecosystems work. I didn't learn this when I was growing up in a family that prided itself on being able to identify birds and trees and such.
Mhm.
So I got interested in native plants 5 years ago. 3 years ago, I ran across some information that indicated that, wow, hey, climate is urgent. Climate change is an urgent issue to deal with. 2 years after that, I started to really change my understanding of what climate change is about, both as far as what is the problem and what is the solution. And so that's where we are now. So I'll start with, I have 6 items here on my handy dandy notepad. And number one is the climate crisis is an ecological crisis. It cannot and should not be understood only as just climate, or only as CO2, or only as fossil fuels. It is an ecological crisis. Humans, such as we are currently structured today, are making war on our natural systems.
Mhm.
And it's not entirely, I would say that's 10% human nature and 90% the institutions that we've invented that do not serve us very well. But the ecological crisis, the climate crisis, is an ecological crisis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, everything ties in together, and we're unfortunately trying to take it apart angle by angle, brick by brick, with pretty much every brick that we've laid in the foundation of our society.
Right. So I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. What do you mean?
Oh, so it seems like we've been cutting out pieces of the climate, cutting out pieces of our own ecosystem to build something that doesn't serve us in the same manner.
Right.
That, we try to, all right, so like take the ambition of food, right? Um, you know, we detriment our environment in the pursuit of food, and what we end up doing is ravaging species that could have met our means. You know,
Yeah.
we want waterways, we want irrigation, we want all these things, and yet we ignore the systems that are in front of us in favor of, these concrete ones. I mean, literally concrete.
Yeah, exactly. So one way of looking at that is it's kind of like an investment that will yield dividends if we let it. If you eat into that investment, you're going to have less and less dividends over time. If you put money into that investment, then that's going to yield more dividends over time. So we are kind of destroying and squandering the wealth that the natural world could be giving to us.
Hmm.
And when I say wealth, I think we misunderstand wealth. When we hear wealth, we think of rich people. What
Hmm.
we are neglecting, in my view, is what can create wealth for the poor and the middle class. In other words, the vast majority of people.
Yeah.
So ecological function, whether you're talking about the United States, whether you're talking about relatively poor countries, Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, Asia, we could be restoring ecosystems and creating wealth for average people. And that is almost universally misunderstood. I'm just saying.
I agree.
So item number 2 here, this is Hart's climate philosophy. So item number 2 is, yeah, according to Hart Hagen, the problem is greenhouse gases a little bit.
But there's more to it, right?
Yeah, there's more to it, but it's also greenhouse gases plus land use. How do we treat the land? So we look to the sky to understand what we've done to the climate. And there's too much CO2 up there, and there's too much methane up there, and there's too much nitrous oxide up there. There's too many fluorocarbons up there, but mainly it's CO2, according to the mainstream story.
You know, it kind of reminds me of that old cliche, you know, when somebody's trying to distract you, they tell you to look up.
Right, squirrel.
Yeah. It's like the mainstream climate scientists, they're all like, oh, don't pay attention to the rivers and your local like wildlife or the bugs, the bees, the bears, and all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a climatologist named Mian, who spent a lot of the time in the U.S., but he's now back to his home country of Spain. And Mian is talking to Judith Schwartz, who writes the book called Water in Plain Sight, which is a different angle on what the climate situation is about. And Judith said, so I'm going to get later on, I'm going to start talking about how water is more important than we're led to believe. And so Judith is talking to Mian, and she says, if water is so important, why is the entire conversation about CO2? Yeah. And he says, and I totally agree with this. He says, because you can talk about CO2 for decades and not do anything about it.
Yeah. Sounds like a distraction. I mean, you definitely need to look at things from all angles, but I think that the movement as a whole, from what you've been telling me, is grossly hyper-focused, correct? On that one aspect.
Yes. There's an appropriate amount of attention to give to CO2 and other greenhouse gases. But you know, pulling a number out, like what is the relative importance of CO2 compared with everything else, just from a climate standpoint? I think maybe 10 or 20% of the conversation should involve CO2, and the rest of the conversation should involve other things.
Like where your energy is coming from, how you're transporting that energy, your water, your soil conservation, how you deal with erosion. I think, you know, put all 5 of those at 20% a piece.
Yeah, right.
Am I missing anything, or?
Well, let me go on with this. You named some important issues. I'll address those as I go. So we're still on item number 2. The problem, yes, is greenhouse gases, but it's also what have we done to the land? Acre by acre, square mile by square mile, what have we done to the land? And if we look at what we've done to the land, we'll find that we have broken a lot of our water cycles, and we've broken a lot of our ecosystems. So we'll talk about water cycles, but we learned in school a very simplified version of water cycles. What we learned in school, and blows my mind that climatology or meteorology still has this view of the water cycle. Water vapor comes from the oceans evaporate water, and then that travels over the land, and then something causes precipitation and it falls, and then it runs into the streams and rivers back to the ocean, and repeat the process. What that misses is, okay, yeah, if that were true, then you would have less precipitation as you get to the middle of a continent. You would have all the precipitation being near the coast.
Yeah.
But look at the United States. Which is wetter and which is drier, the east or the west? Our prevailing winds go west to east. You would think that there'd be more precipitation where?
On the west coast.
In the west. But there's more precipitation where?
On the east.
In the east has much more precipitation than the west.
Mhm.
So, I mean, yes, the Rocky Mountains get in the way, but California is on the west side of the Rocky Mountains and it's dry.
Yep. Yep.
Why is this the case? So we need another theory of what causes rain. And that's one part of our study of water cycles is what causes rain, what causes precipitation. Another part of it is that water vapor has a cooling effect.
Mhm.
When you're in a forest, it feels cool. Part of that is because of the shade, but part of that is because of the water vapor.
Yeah, it's
It,
evaporating out of everything, right?
right. You're right. Yeah. So water vapor, there's a certain, when I was in high school physics, I learned that, it takes 1 calorie to heat 1 gram of water, 1 degree
Yeah.
Celsius. Okay. So you remember that. And it takes more than 1 calorie to go from ice to water. It takes, I don't remember the number, but when it goes from water, liquid to vapor, it takes 590 calories. Now, those are, when we talk about calories in our diet, we're talking about kilocalories or
Mhm.
so it's really kind of less than, so it's a little more than half a calorie but for 1 gram to go from liquid to vapor. So what it does, so it takes all that energy. What does it do with it? Well, that energy becomes something called latent heat, which is a little bit misleading because it's hidden heat. It's not sensible heat. It doesn't feel like heat.
Mhm.
So that it takes heat from the atmosphere and it puts it into this form of energy like air, like water vapor molecules going real fast. It's a form of
Yeah.
motion energy. But it feels cool, and that's where so we want that cooling effect. So that is not discussed to any appreciable extent in the climate movement. To me, transpiration, if we want to solve climate and our water cycles, what's called transpiration. It's like when plants and also the ground, when water evaporates, it's called transpiration. It has a tremendous cooling effect. And it only happens if there's water there. It mainly only happens if you have lots of plants,
Yeah.
trees, grasses, bushes, vines, all kinds of plants. More plant matter is better.
So how do
So,
we get more plant matter on the West Coast to save California?
well, that's an excellent question. So, I would say one thing you have to understand about California
Mhm.
is let's talk about beavers for just a second.
Sure.
So beavers, there used to be 200 to 300 million beavers
Mhm.
in North America. Used to be
Yeah.
prior to European settlement. Also, the surface area of North America used to be 8% fresh water. We got rid of the beavers, and we've drained the swamps and always draining.
Well, we left
And
one swamp over in DC.
I know if we could only drain that one, we'd be in good shape. Let's fill up the other swamps, drain the one in
Yeah,
DC.
yeah, yeah. We drained
Yeah,
all the wrong swamps.
right. I mean, we just got it totally 100% backwards. So, uh, so we're talking about how to rehydrate California. You have to understand that there was a gold rush. There was a gold rush in California in what year? The San Francisco
69ers, right?
49ers.
49ers, my bad. I knew it had a nine. I knew it was like a
Right.
B.
You were on the right
I'm not a
track.
sports ball fan.
Right. So that San Francisco 49ers stands for 1849, the gold rush. But prior to the gold rush in California, there was a rush for beaver pelts. So
Mhm.
they killed all the beavers, not only because they wanted the pelts, but also because beavers, they're getting in our way. We want to farm, we want to do other things. The beavers are in our way. So they killed all the beavers in California. And California didn't used to be as dry as it is now.
Wonder
Another
what
thing,
changed.
and yeah, and they've eliminated 95% of the redwood forests.
Mhm.
When they want water for irrigation, they get it from way down under, and that can't go on forever. When you lower the water table by using water for irrigation for farming, then that dries out the landscape.
Yep.
So there are lots of things we're doing in California to dry out the landscape. So where were we on that?
Well, we were initially talking about the water cycle, right?
Yeah.
And how the eighth grade and elementary school model is a little narrow-minded and outdated. Then we started talking about possible solutions to it, and I asked you how do we get those plants in California, and then we jumped over onto the actions of humans that have compounded the issue through the elimination of beavers.
Right. So we'll talk about more solutions in just a minute, but let me go to item number 3 on my list here under Hart's climate philosophy. Item number 3 is where I just kind of briefly point out what is the mainstream climate conversation. The mainstream climate conversation is that, okay, the problem is CO2, too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's a greenhouse gas, etc. The carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere has gone from about 280 parts per million to over 400 parts per million. And the solution is to reduce emissions, so the story goes. The part of the way we get that is to get energy from solar power and wind power. We should drive electric vehicles because they emit less carbon dioxide, so the story goes. And we want to incentivize business to make solar panels, and we want to incentivize business to do wind energy and electric vehicles, and if we do all this, we'll create jobs. And and the whole focus is incentivizing business and maybe consumers to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions by reducing fossil fuels. There's also this thing, and I consider it a pure, I'm sorry to offend anybody, but to me, 100% renewable energy is pure fantasy. That's a whole other conversation. I think it's a slogan that doesn't mean anything. You have to look into how the sausage is made. You have to look into how renewable energy is really made. You have to look at how productive is it or is it not. You have to look at what does it take to make a solar panel, all the metals. It makes my stomach turn when I think about it, because I have looked at how the sausage is made, but that's another conversation. Let me go on to item number 4, Hart solutions. So Hart solutions, we have to change the way we make decisions. We have a climate problem and a biological problem, an ecological problem, because of what we've done to land and what we've done to our water cycles and what we've done to our ecosystems. And in order for that to change, we have to change how we make decisions. And so that's one thing. You can't neglect the political component of it. Like, there are people in the mainstream climate movement who seem to think that we can solve this problem and still spend $750 billion a year on so-called defense.
Yeah,
They're just not talking about it.
Yeah,
They're just not talking about it. And this environmental giant, Bill McKibben, says, well, the Pentagon's not a real big deal. It's the biggest emitter in the world, biggest institutional emitter of carbon in the world. 2/3 of the Superfund sites are Department of Defense.
yeah.
But that's not a big deal.
If I may, it seems to me that if money is liquid value, right, and value is something we derive from labor, it is something subjective, it is something that we estimate and all of that, but ultimately that value is generated at someone's labor that is then taxed. That means that there is a certain percentage of everyone's drive time, the individual's transportation to work, the food they have to consume to replace the calories they burnt in whichever job it is, the infrastructure of the given job, like the true cost of the war effort to the environment.
Oh, yeah.
It is incalculable. like you can look at the direct cost of the bomb that
Yeah.
exploded or the
Yeah.
fuel that was meant to manufacture that bomb, but there's also every single stop up in that supply chain, of where it started off with some high school student flipping burgers at McDonald's,
Mhm.
and they had to work an extra couple hours every single week so that they can afford their share of the
Mhm.
bombs going off.
Mhm. You're speaking my language. We have to look at the supply chain that results in whatever activities we have going on. And and another kind of angle on that is that, there will never be any clean and renewable bombs.
Yeah.
There will never be, what are we going to do? Put a solar panel on McDonald's and all of a sudden that makes it clean and renewable. The mainstream climate movement and all these 100% clean and renewable energy resolutions we've got going on locally, they're not talking about the supply chain. It's like it shows up at our county line. So,
Magic.
yeah, it shows up at our county line. We're not going to pay any attention to what it took to make that solar panel. And we're not going to restructure, like I have several industries or sectors here. We need to change how the decisions are made that result in what we have, defense, transportation, farming, food, international trade, forestry, mining, oil and gas, and I'm just getting started. You could say insurance, you could say real estate, you should say these agribusiness monopolies. The clean and renewable energy movement and the climate movement, they're acting like if we just change the way we generate energy, then we'll be clean and renewable.
It's a dream. It's a panacea.
We're not talking about what is the end goal of this energy that we're using. What what I'm saying?
Yeah,
What is this energy being used for?
well, to improve the quality and longevity of human life. Like that, there's like life is there to arrange energy into complex systems. That is what life continuously like that's what it seeks to do. And why do we want to heat our house? So that we can stay alive. Why do we want to grow food? So that we can stay alive. And we need to start living within within our means more individually. It's my personal philosophy. I think that we need to be conscientious of the impacts we have on those around us. I'm going to spare you my monologue, but
no, I mean, you're hitting right on it. So when you said quality of life, to me, shouldn't the purpose of all of our public policy be to enhance the quality? I mean, what's the end goal? We have all of these activities going on that do not enhance our quality of life. And these are illegitimate institutions. They're taking our money, they're taking our time, they're taking our environment. They're taking a certain amount of time in our process of becoming educated. And in my view, they exist to serve the ruling elites. They don't exist to enhance our quality of life.
Yeah, and I think that's by design. I think that, so one quote that I'm really fond of is that charity that is compulsory is not charity, right? And that government policy and participation is a compulsory act backed by force. And that in its own nature prohibits it from ever being, egalitarian. It's never going to support the individual. It's never going to, enhance the quality of life for everyone, because there's always going to be a select few that are initiating that force to their own benefit, and they're going to be skimming from the top. And so we need to come up with systems outside of that metric, without the initiation of force, policies and social systems that improve the quality of human existence. And I think that the best system that has ever improved human quality of life is the free exchange of resources between consenting peoples, be it property, be it knowledge, be it energy, be it, anything. Consensual transactions and interactions. That's what lifts the human condition.
So I hear you on that. And, we're going to, this won't be our last, this is one of many conversations we're going to have in the future. And I would like to have a conversation about what has to be consensual and what might be. I mean, yes, everything should be consensual. One of my core values is democracy and freedom, et cetera. So, how does that relate to, the public library or things like that, that seem to be a good use of our collective resources? So I think there should be a place for that. And can I move on to the next item here?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I'm sorry if I derailed
no,
you.
not at all, not at all. So we're going through Hart's climate philosophy. I've been through number 1, 2, 3. I was starting on 4, and we need to look at how. So, what are the solutions? What are Hart's solutions to the climate issue? And so we need to change the way decisions are made. We need to understand that we don't live in a democracy. If a democracy is where if a democracy is where the collective will of the people is the primary driver of public policy. If you look at concentrated power runs the show. So in my view, so we have to look at how decisions are made. How is it that we have a Defense Department that nobody would consent to if it was up to us? How is it that we have a transportation system that we would never sign up for? It was not if it was up to us. How is it that we have a food system that we want to change, but we're not allowed to? Nobody wants all these subtherapeutic antibiotics in our cattle. Nobody wants that. So we have to understand how decision, as opposed to what? As opposed to friends of mine who think the Democratic Party has got their back, and it's a sham and it's a scam. And it's not just the Democratic Party, but it's anybody who kind of believes in the system that we have. Here's the system that we have. I like quoting Jeffrey Sachs, who's economist Jeffrey Sachs. He's currently at Columbia. He's very well thought of. And he says, we have a society, he means government, but we have a society that is incapable of solving even one major problem. Even one. We just don't solve problems. We perpetuate problems. Government has not in the problem solving mode. They're in the mode of creating problems.
Yep.
And so if you have faith in that system, then you're wasting your time and you're wasting my time. If you think that we have a system that's solving problems, if you think either major party is solving problems, then we need to talk. And if you think any of these big corporations are solving anybody's problems, we need to talk. If you think any of the billionaires that pay PR to make you think well of them, if you think they're solving any of our problems, we need to talk. So I guess rule number 1, don't have faith in the system such as it is. We need to change the way decisions are made. And the decisions I'm talking about are the ones that lead to the defense system, the transportation system, farming, food, international trade, forestry, mining, oil and gas. All of that is structured in a way that we wouldn't sign up for if we had a choice. So a problem identified is half solved. And I'm wanting to grab people by the lapels and saying, stop believing in our system such as it is. It's not solving problems. It's only making problems.
Well, you're not going to get any pushback from any libertarians. We believe that you got to embody it. And that's something that, we've been poor exemplars of over the last 50 years that our party has existed, because, we've debated a lot amongst ourselves, but I think that you're starting to see us come out of the woodwork and start to, come forward with
reminder, Randall is the head of the Kentucky Libertarian Party. And he's talking about, to what extent do libertarians embody what we're talking about, which is, to be the change you want to see, right?
Yeah, like I would say probably about 25 to 33% of our active party membership are permaculturalists. They homestead, they manage the water. They, like, you can ask, let's say you went out there and you did a poll, right? And you're like, what is a swell on contour? I bet, I bet the demographic that's going to be in the highest, like, accurate answer marks are probably going to be Green and Libertarian Party registered voters. You ask a libertarian, like, oh, well, what's sustainability? And they're like, every aspect of my life is about sustainability. Self-reliance is a core tenet, and it's all about consent and knowing your relationship with your fellow. And I think that, these solutions, government's not the answer. They are the problem. They exist as a cancerous cyst that persists to keep itself going. Like that's all they want to do is, distract you with the CO2 emissions and tell you to forget everything else. They don't want you to go out there and actually start raising chickens. Your HOA will not like you to do that. Your city council will not like you to have rabbits in your backyard or a garden in your front yard. But those are the changes that we as individuals need to take upon ourselves if we would like to see a world that continues.
Fantastic. And what you just described to me is the main solution to most of our problems.
Swells on contour.
Exactly. I mean, I'm serious. I'm
Me
serious.
too.
Within the, I mean, I meant the whole lifestyle thing,
Yeah.
self-reliance, sustainability, etc. But also the swales on contour are one of the main components of, to me, rehydrating the earth is one of the would solve 2/3 of the world's problems if we did it consistently, if we did it at any scale, if we did what needed to be done to rehydrate the earth. And I have 6 solutions down here that I'll get to in a minute. But like more plant matter, animal engineers, understanding when animals can be engineers that can work for us, ecosystems, functioning ecosystems. I'm item number 3 on my solutions for rehydrating the earth. Earthworks is number 4, which earthworks includes small dams, small ponds, swales on contour. Number 5 is soil, healthy soils, soils that absorb the rain when it rains, and they keep it for you. They keep it for the plant growth. And number 6 is dead organic matter, leaves, limbs, and logs. So those are my categorization of the 6 things that are needed to rehydrate the earth. And if we rehydrated the earth, the poorest people in the world would become a whole lot wealthier.
Oh yeah, because they could go
and
out
self-reliant. There are people especially in Africa, on permanent food aid that have gotten off the permanent food aid because of land management. And so
we got our work cut out for us.
I know. Let's start in Jefferson County and Bullitt County. So we were on item number 4. Hart's solutions include, change the way decisions are made, restore ecosystems. This includes a farm is part of an ecosystem. There's no reason for a farm can be a wildlife habitat. It doesn't, GMO corn is not a wildlife habitat. Monocultures are not wildlife habitats. Tree plantations are not wildlife habitats. But if you have a biologically diverse farm like Joel Salatin or Gabe Brown or Will Harris or Mark Shepard, then that is a wildlife habitat. So restoring our ecosystems on our farms, doing forestry, so the forest is an ecosystem, nurturing our waterways so that the waterway is an ecosystem, and then restoring our water cycles wherever we are, in cities, in the suburbs, in the countryside, in the deserts, in the forests, we're restoring water cycles wherever they are is one of Hart Hagen's major solutions for doing the climate thing. I mean, actually solving climate change, not just talking about it, because there's a lot of talk.
Well, it sounds like you've got a model that's not just solving climate change, but it's actual climate improvement. you know, because you could take somewhere like, you know, middle of a desert. And if you can rehydrate the earth, bring back organic matter to it, bring back nutrients, bring back the rain, bring back the wildlife, the you know, the little micro engineers and the ants and the bugs and the bees and the birds and the beavers and all of that. I mean, you could see a green world like we have never had before, full of life that is complementary and coexisting. And it's more than just
We
solving the change.
yeah.
It's
Yeah, we can
improving.
absolutely, you know, most deserts are man-made. We created the situation, we made it a desert, we can make it into back to what it was. If it was a forest before, or if it was a grassland before, we can put it back to where it was. Yes, there are strategies for that. And you know, the strategies involve I have this picture of it's from a John D. Liu video, and it's where they're taking it's a desert that's like pure sand. They're taking straw. You imagine straw, you know, straw in a bale is about, you know, this long, you know, 18 inches long. And so you take the straw, you put it on the sand, you take a flat shovel and you jab it down in there so that that straw is poking up. Now, what's going to happen? That straw is going to catch dust. That straw is going to catch seeds, and when it rains, there's going to be something to, you know, it's going to capture more of the moisture than it would if it were just sand. And
Mhm.
that's one of the ways. That's one of the ways that you start a desert if the desert is pure sand. Now,
Yeah.
there are a lot of places like it's not a total desert, but there's not a lot of plant life there either. So what the mainstream climate movement and their lackeys in the corporate media, they're saying, oh, we need a plant-based diet and we need to eat less meat and you need to be vegan and all this stuff. Okay, all due respect to people who really sincerely believe that. And if somebody doesn't want to kill animals, that's their business. But ecologically, I mean, they're just wrong. And it's a big fat media campaign that's full of lies. I'm not saying people know they're lying. Some people know they're lying and others don't know they're lying.
Mhm.
But uh, animals like cattle, for example, if you rotate them strategically, then they can be absolutely vital
Yep.
to the restoration of a grassland.
Yep. Yep.
And there's no way, there's probably no other animal other than cattle and other grazing animals. There's probably no other way to restore the grasslands of the world. You know, maybe two-thirds of the world is two-thirds of the, you know, reasonably arable land in the world was grassland. The rest was, for, you know, some of it's forest, some of it's grasslands. Most of the landmass of the earth historically has been grasslands, and that there's a lot of it. It is currently in the process of desertifying, and grazing animals strategically rotated are the way to restore that. Because for one thing, they have manure. For another thing, they eat the dead organic matter. Like a grass will grow and then it will kind of start to die.
Mhm.
When that if it's just allows to die if it is grazed, then that goes into the digestive tract of an animal. The animal poops it back out. A lot of fertilizer, a lot of microorganisms that are really good for the soil. So there's that. Or what else? If the cow doesn't eat it, what happens? One thing, it can decay gradually,
Mhm.
which doesn't help anything. In fact, the plant just kind of kills itself if that
Yeah.
happens. Another thing that can happen, people burn. Controlled burning, all due respect to anybody who does it differently or disagrees, but controlled burning is almost never a good thing. It releases a lot of pollution, plus it tends to favor fire-dependent plant species. And you don't want to favor you want to favor animal dependent plant species. You want to favor species that are evolved to go through the digestive tract of an animal. And that's what you want, because that's for one thing you don't want to burn every year.
Yeah. And
Too
then
much carbon, too much pollution and you're favoring the fire dependent species, what you want is you want animals grazing. And when the animals graze, it's a natural, and if you have animal dependent plant species, then that's much, it does not lend itself to wildfires as much. And plus it restores the soil. See, cattle can be animal engineers. They're packing, so here's what we want to do is biomimicry. We want to mimic nature as it was. So the way most people raise cattle, even if they're grazing, that's not mimicking nature. What happened in nature is that cattle, they're being chased by predators. So they bunch together to protect themselves from predators. Plus, they're grazing. They don't want to stay on the same place because they don't want to eat their own poop. Cattle are funny that way. They don't want to eat their own poop, you know?
Yeah, well, I find that agreeable as well. I don't
Yeah,
want my
right.
poop,
Right. Yeah. Who'd have thought cattle and people are kind of similar like that. So
Great minds.
great minds think alike. So cattle are naturally bunched together and moving. So if you want to mimic that rhythm, what it usually ends up meaning is that cattle graze in one spot for one day, and then they get moved and they don't come back to that spot for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, something probably, you know, on average about 6 months. It depends on a lot of factors, but you can mimic nature that way. And it's almost never done that way. And I just gave you kind of a whirlwind tour of why cattle are good.
Yeah. Well, if I can give you two quick anecdotes, both relate to my brother. I don't know how everybody viewing this will like one of them, but I think they'll like the second. So I'll do the second first.
Okay.
So my brother doesn't mow his grass. He doesn't mow his yard.
Mhm.
He actually has, he's got 12 acres and he just rotates sheep.
Rotate sheep?
Yep, he's got a couple of sheep and a couple of cattle, and they rotate his house. And he, you know, does it like, you know, clockwork. Every, you know, so often they go around to a different pasture. His grass never gets too tall, and his sheep never run out of food. It gives them plenty of time for that poo to decompose enough so that it's not right there where they would be eating. His grass grows a lot quicker than mine.
Right.
And he never has to mow it, and it looks better than my yard, which I have to mow because I don't have, you know, my whole property fenced in.
Right.
The other anecdote I have is that, you know, my brother's got sheep. He used to have goats, but 2 goats got out, and we have periodically seen them. They
Wild
have,
goats. They're wild now.
Yeah, they belong to Fort Knox, but they like to climb this hill behind our houses, and the hill it's a knob hill. So it's a, you know, a unique geographic feature native to Kentucky, in which you have a siltstone hill, which is very like it is very susceptible to erosion, right? So it's a calcium rich, soft hill rock. But on the top of it, there's a hard limestone cap. And that limestone cap, it's been exposed to the elements for generations. And as it wears down, the softer stone underneath of it wears down. And so what you have is this geographic feature here in Kentucky called a knob hill, which is actually endangered. Like, people don't think about hills or mountains, but those things are endangered, right? The natural process is taking them apart. Well, these 2 goats that like to climb this one hill in particular have actually been reforesting its peak.
How do they do that? How do they reforest it?
Well, they eat seeds. Some of those seeds survive their digestive tract, and due to the steepness of the hill, they have fewer predators up there. And so they like to bed up there. And a lot of people and a lot of goats like to use the restroom somewhat near where they sleep. And so you've got this rich material that is being brought back up the hill and carrying, you know, sediment back up the hill through this natural process of a grazing animal, and it's covering that hard limestone back over in earth and preventing further erosion. And then it's bringing with it various grasses and other plant life. And the sheer efficiency of the goats as opposed to the native deer. Like the deer, they don't like to sleep on the top of a hill. That's not their natural habitat.
Hmm.
But that goat species, they find that to be a safe
Mhm.
place for them. And so you can see the different types of trees like that habitat, different types of wildlife like that habitat. And there's actually a grassy patch that's developed from a few years of these goats. Just, I mean, you can't catch them.
Yeah,
I mean, you're
that's
on a
awesome. So,
30% grade, but they're bringing it back.
right.
They're restoring that feature.
So let me make an observation. I don't know if you've heard this part before, but there's a general principle there.
Mhm.
And the general principle is that animals serve the function of carrying nutrients and seeds uphill.
Yeah,
Because
and
because what naturally happens, I mean, the rain
comes
pushes the
down.
nutrient, pushes things down. So animals sometimes like to go down into the valley where there's more food, but then they go back up and they're carrying nutrients and seeds back up.
Yeah, I would also like to say that certain tree species do it as well, and particularly the Virginia pine.
Hmm.
The Virginia pine is one of my least favorite tree species as far as like any sort of like woodwork or just like something to keep around.
Mhm.
But they're a particularly interesting tree because their root structure is generally pretty weak. They grow really fast, they grow really tall, and they get top heavy.
Mhm.
And that actually lends them to like as they come into a region, they don't actually need as nutriently dense soils. They can grow in a much more arid environment, like sparsely nutrient rich environment than like the eastern white pine or some of those pines. But what the Virginia pine does is if you're in Bullitt County and you're ever driving around and you see like a rocky exposed hill peak, the only tree that's going to be growing anywhere near it is that Virginia pine, because that pine tree, it's going to grow and circle the hill, and it's going to kind of work its way,
Hmm.
spiraling its way up
Mhm.
as generations go. But as the wind catches it, it's going to fall,
Mhm.
and it's going to actually fall uphill a lot
Yeah.
of the time.
Hmm.
And it just carried nutrients from down here
Mhm.
to
Right.
60 feet higher,
Hmm.
and it carried those seeds 60 feet higher, and they try to rebuild and protect those hills as they go.
That's interesting. Which all of which illustrates that we need to have kind of like we need to have a routine call, you, me, and other people that are interested, to talk about how do we have regenerative farms and live off the land and get the most of the land,
Yeah, yeah.
that kind of thing. So I'm wondering how much. Okay, so what we've been doing is talking about Hart's climate philosophy. I'm going to give you a quick summary and wrap it up. How's that?
Sounds good.
Okay, so I start off saying, climate crisis is part of an ecological crisis. We can't define it so narrowly. If we define it narrowly, we're going to get used and abused. And that's what's happening right now. We're defining it narrowly. We're being used and abused by charlatans. So we have to understand that greenhouse gases are part of the problem, but they're not the entire problem. They're not the entire solution by a long shot. Number three, we have to understand what the mainstream climate movement is saying, because you have a lot of well-intentioned people, but you have some kind of self-appointed experts that are being lied to, and they don't know they're being lied to,
Mhm.
and they get self-righteous and defensive, and they don't understand that they're missing a big part of the picture.
Yeah, no one likes being wrong.
Yeah. So I've shared with you some of my solutions. A lot of my solutions are, we have to look at how decisions are made. We have to understand how power works. We have to understand who is creating the world around us politically and economically. We have to understand how that world came about so that we can walk back some of that and start making decisions that work for us, not the oligarchs. And another part of Hart's solutions, it has to do with water cycles, it has to do with ecosystems. And if we could rehydrate the earth, I feel we could solve 2/3 of the earth's problems. Insofar as wars are fought that's a whole other thing I don't want to digress into. I think it would take away a lot of the reasons, the legitimate and illegitimate reasons why people have conflict with one another. Mark Twain said, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting over.
Yeah.
So that's about, yeah. So, later on, subsequent conversations, we'll talk in a little bit more detail about what I consider to be the main ways of rehydrating the earth, which includes increasing plant matter, enlisting the support of animal engineers, going for thinking in terms of entire ecosystems, not just part of the ecosystem like carbon dioxide or whatever. And we need to strategically have small earthworks like swales, small ponds, things that slow the flow of water. We need the water to soak in where it is. We need to nurture healthy soils. We can talk at some point about the 5 principles of soil health. Good stuff. And last but not least, we need to keep our dead organic matter and utilize it. We need to go steal other people's leaves, limbs, and logs, bring it to where we are, because it has a whole lot of value ecologically. It absorbs a whole lot of water.
With their consent.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about theft. No, I'm kidding. Randall, this has been a great conversation. Randall Daniel, head of Kentucky Libertarian Party, and me, Art Hagen. Sounds like me, Kent Brockman, but Simpsons reference there. Randall, thank you for joining me. We'll have to
Thanks for having me.
We'll talk again soon about this and many, many other exciting topics. How's that?
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
Have a great evening. Stay on the line, but we're going to end the recording now.